for today's webinar, it's all about data. So I'm actually pretty excited. Jordan and I are going to share a ton of research, like things that we actually know in a time where there's sometimes a lack of data. We're going to kind of dig in and share research and data so that you can go back with confidence. We'd love to know where you're joining us from. It is a rainy day here in Canada, in Guelph, Ontario. Jordan, I think you're joining us from San Francisco.
I'm in
So
San Francisco.
yeah, is it
Sunny and
sunny?
beautiful. Sorry,
As
sorry,
usual.
sorry to bring the good news.
I know. And Jordan knows I used to live in California. So it's like I actually know how beautiful and gorgeous it probably is. And so throw your questions in also. So as we go through, I will see if there's questions we want to do at the time, or we'll make sure we have time at the end. Great. We have Nikolai joining us from Germany. Love that.
Awesome. New
New
York,
York.
awesome.
Oh, not beautiful here. Yeah. Darcy, you probably have the same weather I do. So throw those in the chat. Again, this is supposed to be conversational and fun. Let's go ahead and I'm going to start by just introducing myself. And we are a semantic technology company here at Schema App. And so we always introduce ourselves with our knowledge graph. And it's who I am and how I'm connected to other things in the world and what those relationships are. So you can see at the bottom, I went to school at MIT and I have a degree in engineering. So we today we're not going to get super technical, but if we need to go there, we can. I'm a proud Canadian. I'm the CEO and co-founder here at Schema App. And actually, the reason I lived in California is because I actually spent 14 years at Cisco. And I know a thing or two about schema markup and knowledge graphs and visibility and AI. And a fun fact about me is I used to drive an Austin Healey Sprite. So there's a picture of my car, and my actual car was in the movie called Losing Chase that Kevin Bacon directed. So Kevin Bacon used to drive my car, which is so super fun. And I like to share that because you infer that you can win the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon game. And when we talk about AI and structured data, it's about sort of grounding AI because it can do accurate inferencing. And so that's why we introduce ourselves this way. So I'm super excited today also to be joined by my great friend, Jordan. Jordan, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Martha. Thrilled to be here. And a little bit about myself. I grew up. My hometown is Green Bay, Wisconsin. So by default, I'm a Packer fan. When you grow up in a place like Green Bay, you kind of bleed green and gold. I also am in the Bay Area because of an employer. So I moved here back in 2009 to join eBay and spent 5 years at eBay helping to build up the SEO and content marketing practice at eBay. Learned a ton, had global teams, loved it, and just really kind of grew my career from there to being part of software companies like Searchmetrics. And then now I am the founder of Previsible, where we're helping companies with organic visibility and growth, and just having a ton of fun, even though it's my first time on the agency side, helping companies, SEOs really understand what's happening in probably what's one of the most transformational periods in our industry.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Like, what do we know? What does the landscape look like? And then, like I said, some research that both of our companies have looked at. As we get started, I want to just like paint the picture of how I see the world today, and a lot of this is around brand discovery, right? We used to have confidence in the metrics around page rank and clicks and traffic coming to our site, but in this like new world, it's really about being part of the answer, making sure your content's understood, and you being chosen as this trusted source, or that your content is being chosen as a trusted source. And so now, instead of it just being a person we're interacting with, there's this machine or AI kind of like sitting in between it. And so like there's this, you know, I, idea of like control loss a little bit, right? Like there's this intermediary that's sitting between it, and the AI is deciding how you're described, if you're going to get included. And it's sort of like Google on steroids, right? Like we've always had Google kind of doing this intermediary, but it's more than that. And I like to talk about the impact it has to us in digital marketing. And I often talk about like the dark funnel or the broken funnel, because so much of what we sort of relied on forever around sort of being able to show our value, right? Being able to show sort of the impact we're having within our organizations has kind of gone away, right? AI is answering the questions and therefore we're not getting the click. It's like FAQ, world all over again. Traffic's harder to attribute. And Jordan's going to share some research that they've shown about like, well, what's happening with traffic today in AI. So I love the work that your team's done. We've had to kind of move to pay for things because our organic organic traffic is all over the place, right? It's unpredictable. And it's really this changing time. Jordan, I know you and I have talked a lot about metrics also, and sort of like what can you trust and you can't trust. Any thoughts on
Right.
this?
Yeah, I mean, this is really at the backbone of what all of us are facing, whether we're on agency side or we're in house, we're working with other marketing leaders or product leaders. It is explaining what is organic and what is the measurement. This dark funnel is has become complex over the past couple years from a variety of for a variety of different reasons. But what I fundamentally am constantly pushing and advocating for is truly understanding where users are at, right? Like if you can get to the customer, if you can get to your end user and have real conversations, you're unpacking what is a murky and cloudy tracking measurement
I love that.
environment and ecosystem. And that requires like outside of the box thinking. It might require surveys, it might require asking questions, it might require doing, interviews, it might require other forms of real engagement that aren't necessarily what we do on Google Analytics or inside of
Yeah.
Search Console or in our ranking and visibility tracking.
You just mentioned something that I think is kind of fun. Like in this world of AI, we have to get more human, right? It's sort of like a little
It's
bit kind of
crazy. Yeah. Yeah.
backwards.
The
Um,
buyer is not ChatGPT. The
yeah,
buyer is a human. So
yeah.
yeah,
When I kind of think of this, like I think often we talk about SEO. Most people who know kind of that I work in structured data are like Martha, you kind of play in the SEO space. But what's been happening with our customers is we're seeing this like really elevate to be a business problem, right? This is about like business risk now. It's about like building trust with our consumer. It's about revenue loss, like if we can't recapture these things. And so I feel like the problem has changed a little bit to well be beyond just sort of who we are, and like the hallucinations are real. Like we saw this one example, we have a case study on our website where Wells Fargo, one of their branches was being reported by AO as being closed, and it was referencing this like super old article, right? And they did have a location page. It showed that it was open. It had, I'll say, very basic schema markup on it. And it wasn't until we connected those dots, right? We connected it to its graph, similar to how I introduced myself, that AIO started getting it right. And so again, like this was a pretty big risk for Wells Fargo, right? That then we were able to solve. And so again, sort of that sort of thinking around sort of why is it important that we're not just measuring but we're acting is so important. And this is one of my favorites. When I talk to enterprise clients, they're like, "Don't worry, Martha. Like I'm investing in Profound. Like I got this." And I always, like to call out the, things that are maybe unpopular. Jordan, you know that about me,
right,
right?
right,
But
right.
like,
I'm the same way. It might be
but like
controversial or just reality.
But like, just because we're measuring the change doesn't actually mean we're solving it. And so I
Yes,
actually think like a lot of organizations are like, good news. Like I've invested in SEMrush AI. Like I've got a handle on this. Like we might have more visibility, and a lot of like these metrics are also new, right? Some of them are, I would say, a little fabricated based on sort of the fact that the prompts aren't real because we're not getting that data from ChatGPT and others. And so really where I'm trying to get organizations to think about is like, let's just not measure, let's act, right? Let's actually like take control of how your information is understood and make sure that you're, doing something, taking action, right? Or taking strategy, because the visibility is the outcome, but it's not actually how we solve the problem. and
that's
and
right.
that's sort of like,
Solutions don't exist in these tools. The solutions aren't in these tracking places. And actually, Dane has a great question in our channel here about what is good SEO. And to your point, Dane, like SEO isn't necessarily getting more expensive. We're making it more expensive because we're not doing SEO in a great way. We're not thinking about users. We're not thinking about scaling in an appropriate way. We're not building integritous authority campaigns. We're not actually doing real SEO. And because of that, we create a huge burden on our businesses. And it's one of the great challenges we have, which is like the knowledge gap on how to do the right work starts with understanding the data and context for your users.
amazing. Great transition, Jordan. So we're going to get to the data. I have like two more kind of setup slides. So like we are seeing structured data with context, like when you build knowledge graphs, solve this problem. And it's like how you take control of how it understands your brand. And it makes total sense why Google has been standing, and I'm going to Search Console Live in Toronto on Tuesday. So I'm hoping they're going to talk again about how structured data is critical to AI features. It's critical to understanding. Microsoft's also been really clear about this, and it makes total sense, right? It's because they're using this to do that inferencing, just like my Kevin Bacon example. And I think what's even cooler if we think beyond today, which is like how do we get visibility and take control in AI, to this future state where we need to actually be, showing up and interacting with agents, right? This is sort of like version 2 of where we're going. Well, Microsoft's saying that structured data is actually going to help them inform their endpoint, which is NL Web, to help be prepared for the agentic web. So, really we're thinking about this as a data layer. And I'm super excited, Jordan. You're going to talk a little bit about the interaction kind of with, how we're sort of like getting there. I'm going to then talk about how we're seeing structured data make a difference. One last thing on context, we often talk about like, well, Martha, that's great that you're a semantic technology company, you love knowledge graphs, but like, tell us something else, right? So Gartner has been calling out knowledge graphs as critical infrastructure since 2024. And a lot of this is because it's actually allowing inferencing to be done properly. They also, Gartner just announced again, semantic layers, which is like the semantic data layer, is sort of how you're going to actually allow your analytics and data layers to be smarter. And so this is, again, SEOs. We're still thinking about this as visibility, but it's really about taking control. Speaking of AI trying to show us, I'm going to hand it over to you, Jordan, and talk a little bit about what you've done in the Previsible study and sort of like how urgent is this AI visibility play, like based on
Yeah.
real data?
One of the great challenges is unpacking what's happening in these LLMs, right? Like, and where many of us as marketers or as SEOs start is that we're trying to understand what are the prompts, what are people doing, and that is a very valid question because we want to get at the heart of like what is happening with real users. But fundamentally, we need to rethink where we start the journey. And so, for the last 2 years, we've published a piece of research that analyzes millions of LLM sessions. So we're actually looking at the real traffic that lands on web pages across our ecosystem of clients and partners so that we can really truly gather intel on what is happening. And there's a couple of really interesting components to this whole AI discovery ecosystem. One of them is that, yes, absolutely, ChatGPT continues to be the leading model in terms of actual engagement on the session level. So if you're going to get traffic from someplace, it's likely to come from ChatGPT. 84% of AI discovery happens there. And these are real clicks. These are real sessions, right? However, not everything looks equal. And one of the most interesting things that we've identified is that Copilot and Claude over the past year, so looking at 2024 compared to 2025, because we're looking at a whole year's worth of data here, the fastest growing models were Claude and Copilot. And the reason this is important is because for years now, as SEOs or search marketers, we've talked about verticalization, right? We've talked about how different verticals are going to act very differently and that e-commerce is different because there's a behemoth like Amazon in certain markets or they're not in those markets, or we have healthcare verticals that have very specific use cases for users in environments where consumers go to get research and knowledge about doctors or services. And these things matter greatly to the end user's needs because they're not getting all of their discovery needs met in Google search, or in this case, LLMs. And the LLM fragmentation is going to be another component of verticalization that we have to be aware of. One of the most interesting studies that we've had the experience of working on is that different brands deal with the concept of accessibility differently. So if you look at all these LLM models, whether it be ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, access is one of the big question marks that we as an industry have not done a good job of answering. And what we see though is that news, whether it's global news, brands in Korea or Asia, blocking LLMs from open crawl and accessing their content, or even other brands like Yelp and others who are focused on a different mission in terms of accessibility in LLMs, they're ultimately preventing these models from using their content in training. And this is one of the most important things that we need to all educate our clients, our internal teams on, which is how do LLMs actually access content? It's not the same model as before. It is not how search engines used to do the concept of crawl, index, rank, traffic, sessions. That's gone. In fact, there's really only two ways that these models access data, and it's either through training, so they're training on a corpus of content or data, or they're going through this process of RAG or grounding, where they're actually going into search engines or other ecosystems and retrieving something in order to complete a response. Yelp is one of the brands, like many others, who are restricting this and coming up with a different strategy entirely. Not that this is possible for every brand, but they're actually doing a direct integration, and they're actually building a paid feed where these LLMs can access Yelp. And as of a few months ago, they were able to successfully do that, and their entire visibility in this ecosystem has changed. So it's
So
super important to understand this
super
concept.
important. Well, and this is also like as you control your data, like when I was talking about building structured data, this is where that work Microsoft's doing around NL Web is actually that interface to directly integrate, right? Or MCP. So like again, we're thinking in like I grew up in the API world, right? Like this is like API for agents again, where you have to
Yes.
have the corpus of data and then you have to have those interfaces. If you haven't seen, we did a really cool agentic webinar in December, where my co-founder Mark kind of shared his thinking of how some of these things are going to integrate. So I'll have the team share that in the chat. But totally agree with you, and it plays to this: are you taking control? Right? Like if
Yes.
you're because if they're not crawling and they're not training, how are we making sure that your whole data layer, or what we like to call your semantic data or knowledge graph, are getting pushed, right?
And what we used to do as SEOs, because Google was so gracious in the fact that they wanted to
Yes.
crawl the entire internet, we just threw them this sitemap and said, hey, Google, you figure it out. Here's all of our stuff. That doesn't work. And that sitemaps by themselves are not the solution to be present inside of LLMs. And choosing what models you want to be a part of can almost be as important to your business and brand as anything else.
Jordan, this is just one other thing I want to talk about. Like I talked about, like, you can sit back idly and just measure, or you can kind of take control and act. This is like another examples of like take action to see results. It's like almost like a different, we'll talk about your Green Bay Packers, like it's a different play on the field, right? We can't sort of do it the same way as we've been doing it previously. All right, tell me
That's
more.
right. I mean, so to that point of like, what is it that's working? The fastest growing categories in terms of real sessions are the YMYL traditionally considered categories. They're the real life categories of legal, finance, healthcare have seen the biggest acceleration growth year over year in terms of actual sessions. And this actually makes a ton of sense if you think about it, because at the end of the day, you can prompt your way to a lot of knowledge and information. You can go through this whole process of asking 100 questions to better unpack a healthcare concern you have about yourself. But at the end of the day, the trust is going to go to the brand. At the end of this entire journey, you're going to want to have a connection with something that's not an AI chatbot, but genuinely a solution that can help you with your healthcare, that can help you with your legal issues, that can help you deal with a financial matter. And that's where we've seen the fastest growth year over year. And I wouldn't be surprised if we continue to see this to be the case in the future. And I wouldn't be surprised if we also start to unpack what it means to have an event inside of these AI models in the future for these
Mm.
categories. They're not all going to be the same, and some might become highly verticalized and highly contextual to what users need in the moment. With that same expectation of like what categories are working, we also looked at what pages are working. And this is equally important. I have another example to share here shortly. But unlike SEO, the pages that we used to get a lot of traffic on, these informational pages, these broad evergreen strategies that we've been using for decades now, those aren't the pages that get traffic from LLMs. Not at all. In fact, they're highly contextual pages to users in a point of need. And I think that's the most important thing. It's a point of need. So one of my favorite things is just seeing how industry pages and tool pages have accelerated in growth year over year. These are pages that are like answering a very specific need. These tool pages are actual like resources that we're using. These were never the pages that gained the most traffic, but they were pages that gained a lot of authority, right? If you had a mortgage calculator that was really useful to a set audience, that tool gained a lot of authority. Didn't necessarily generate all the traffic, but it was a huge driver to success. And we're seeing this over and over again as we see the proliferation of AI content generation, the scale of AI content being published to attack that informational broad set. But at the end of the day, that isn't either A, generating the outcomes that we want, and it's certainly not driving any real engagement with the users who are consuming that content.
This is again like a big change, right? It makes me
It
think of
is.
like category pages in e-com like died 3 years ago. Well, guess what? They're back, right? If we're talking about industry pages. So it really is like acting differently. And I loved your sort of question on here or your comment around sort of like it comes back to that human need, right? Which is like we talk about Google and it's like, oh, it's all about intent. But this is like even deeper intent, right? Because we're going to ask multiple questions. We're having conversations now, right? About these different pieces. So super interesting, and I love how you sort of look at the distribution by industry. So depending on
Yes.
sort of where you're working, let's keep digging into. I mean, you have search on here. What does that mean, Jordan? When you talk about search, like is that their on-site search?
Yeah, on-site search pages or more broad, like for a lot of these SaaS players, it's kind of like their version of a category kind of page, but it's built through either like a keyword search or keyword
Interesting.
discovery. And
Yeah, yeah,
again, if you think about SaaS, you think about B2B, it's all about the personalized use case. It's all
yep,
about me as a healthcare business owner needing a software that solves my healthcare business needs, not
yep.
necessarily some broad far-reaching marketing page that just tells me that I'm a CRM, right? Nobody wants that page anymore. What they want is how does the CRM help healthcare companies? And that's the more specificity that you need to see in B2B categories. But in some places like finance, you can see that education is a huge component of what people want. They want to learn before anything else. And course pages and guides are a huge driver of AI traffic, right? So you've prompted your way to a whole bunch of finance questions. And then at the end of that, you're like, okay, if I'm going to really trust this, APR model that I need to learn more about, I'm going to go visit this page and I'm going to actually go and engage in that content.
Yeah, your statement around personalization. A lot of the healthcare organizations we work with, I know, have been on a personalization journey for years, right? Trying to figure out like how do you do like a logged in experience that has like, information about their healthcare journey and so forth. But what you're talking about now is like that personalization starts offsite in the kind of chatbot. And so as we think about sort of how is my organization going to meet the consumer where they're at, now this might be like an SEO challenge, right? Because now we have to have the content, we have to have the things that allow that personalization to happen in discovery, not after they've sort of made a decision or engaged. Super
That's
interesting.
right.
Jordan, what else you got?
So a quick example here. So one of the projects we've had the fortunate opportunity to work with is a sleep apnea alternative. It's a company called Daybreak, and one of the most remarkable learnings that we've come to find out is that the most performant AI discovery page is a really specific test page. So this is the test, the at-home test that you can purchase before committing to this product. And you have to think about in this healthcare category, this individual already knows a lot about their circumstance. They've been to doctors, they've had advice given to them. They probably already have a medical device at home called a CPAP that they're using. It's this mask that you put on your face and it helps you breathe at night better so that you can sleep better. You know a lot about this problem, right? You're not reading an article that is called What is Sleep Apnea? That's not what you're doing inside of an LLM if you're this company. And writing more articles about what is sleep apnea is not going to help Daybreak reach more consumers. What reaches more consumers is this test page that is a commercial page to a huge extent, but it has a 25% conversion rate and over a minute session on LLM traffic. In a 30-day window, they're converting more users into this test process than anywhere else on their site. It is the most trafficked page on their entire site in terms of LLM visits. And you have to think about what is the journey. If you go back then to that original statement I made about prompts, you have to think about all of the prompts that someone has gone through to get to this page. It's not just what is sleep apnea, and it's certainly not what is a CPAP alternative. It is probably a ton of intimate questions about someone's individual needs and what they're looking to solve for. And then they end up on this page and they're willing to take this test at home in order to determine if this is a solution for them. My last piece of data here is just that, AI discovery and traffic share is shifting super fast. And we continue to write about traffic and traffic specifically because we think it is the unlock. It is the stepping back and going through your traffic to understand what users actually want that help you more in determining all of these questions around visibility, awareness, brand sentiment, all these things that we're talking a lot about in organic discovery. Start with understanding what's happening with your traffic and sessions today. It's a much better indicator of who your user, who your customer is, and what they actually want on your website.
And I see like 0.28. Like that's a little bit of traffic. Can you just like so like it's
Yeah.
changing, it's growing fast, but it's still small. Is that what I'm seeing here, Jordan?
Incredibly small. I mean, I think that one of the great challenges we have is that the acceleration rate is fast, right? Like you can even see the title of this article is that AI traffic is up 527%. It is, but it's up 527% from one session. So the reality is that if your baseline is low, the upside is huge. And I think one of the comments that I'm making to a lot of leaders, marketers, new people who are coming into this industry is you really need to understand how quickly this adoption is going to take place for your audience. And that's, I think, the real critical piece, right? If you sell to software engineers, a lot of software engineers are doing almost all of their discovery in AI models, right? But if you're doing business with retirees, they don't even know what ChatGPT is.
Some of
And
them
so,
do,
like, some
but
of
not a
them do,
lot,
not
but not a
all of
much,
them,
not as
but
much,
yeah,
right?
not as much, right? And so, like, we have to be aware of like where our users are at and like how fast this acceleration rate is gonna transfer before we commit to major investments because so many of our customers are still coming from traditional good old SEO inside of Google. And remember, traditional good old SEO inside of Google also helps you be found in AI models, especially when you think about grounding.
Yeah, and that's a lot of like, so it's like we have to do both, right? So we
Yeah,
have
yeah,
to like understand it's changing fast, and then we also have to look at like what's working for today and then what's working for tomorrow. And that's some of like what the research we found at Schema App. So we actually also looked at all of 2025's data and looked to see sort of like what was the impact of sites who had schema markup. And what was really cool is that pages with schema markup had higher impression gains and then they lost fewer clicks and they saw a like less of a decline in CTR. So with this change with AI, it was almost like an insurance policy, right? So if you had really robust schema markup, you kind of lost less traffic. And we also looked at this by vertical, right? So we saw healthcare, finance, actually win sort of. So you can see 27% impressions compared to 58% loss. Like in healthcare, finance also had some big winners. I loved in finance, like they saw an increase of click through rate by 284% compared to pages without. And so, like, schema markup is a great, I'll say, risk aversion, strategy as we sort of are in this kind of changing world. Now, rich results have been around for a long time, right? So this is sort of like how do we decorate in kind of old world Google? But guess what? They're still working. And I love this, like, because in a world where like clicks are disappearing, like you can still get what's this 411% increase in click through rate if you are in hospitality, if you go after rich results. This is probably like product ratings, right? So, I think some of the old ways of gaining visibility to help your brand be seen are still really working well. And I like to, do it while it's working. Um, and a lot of this is around inferencing and entity SEO is something we've talked about over the last couple years. And entity SEO is really sort of when you're doing these connections, you're defining relationships to define like what things are, right? And that's really sort of the essence behind knowledge graphs. It's that you're defining, using different attributes. This isn't just same as, right? This is using any of the attributes in the vocabulary. But the reason I'm talking about entity linking is because what we found that if you do this well, right? So in this example, we're doing entity linking, saying that, we're mentioning knowledge graphs because that's what we do at Schema App here. We sort of build enterprise marketing knowledge graphs. What we're finding though is it's helping with AI visibility. So when we were actually optimizing our site for the keyword entity, because we're dorks, right? With entity linking, I asked my team, like, well, great, like, how is that changing how our visibility is working? And actually, after we did robust entity linking, where again, we were being explicit about things we were talking about, using definitions to define those, again, more than same as, using the whole vocabulary mentions about, um, you know, defining relationships, 20% increase in AIO visibility. And then the best part is in November, we turned it off by accident when we were doing our tests. And I love this. And it plummeted. So we made a mistake. We like unconfigured it. Then we turned it back on. And then through November, we actually started optimizing it with our new platform Entity Hub, and we hit new heights. Now you're like, that's great, Martha. That's your website. I always like to, drink my own champagne before I ask a customer to use it. But here's a customer, a financial services organization. In March is when they started working with us when we built robust schema markup. Again, connected schema markup. This isn't about just like optimizing a page, it's about telling your whole brand story by connecting the dots across all these pieces. Great increase. We saw it settle down again in August. And then we started doing entity linking at scale and actually started optimizing and being really like thoughtful about how we were defining things. And guess what? AIO visibility hit a new height. We're seeing this across industries, across the way. So robust schema markup kind of built is driving results. We're seeing the same in sort of old world metrics, clicks and impressions. In this case, I loved it. Brightview Senior Living was looking to sort of, how do we sort of be more clear about the regions they're serving, the cities we're in. So local businesses, this is really relevant. 25% increase in clicks. I love that. And these were non-branded queries that we were looking at. So again, things that you might end up paying for. Instead of paying for it, we're getting it through organic. In Syncrator, here was another great example. Here we were trying to describe the product. So kind of an e-commerce example. This was a sync top switch, something that we all use every day, not right. So we wanted to be like clear what that was. Non-branded queries after we saw this saw 69% increase in clicks and 116% increase in impressions, right? So these are like by nerdy kind of dial ups in the data, by you taking control of definitions and making that accessible, we're seeing it move. Last examples in healthcare, again, sort of they were looking at increasing top of funnel visibility for their new career pages, huge increases in clicks and impressions. And then they were doing this primarily to get two steps ahead. So Henry Ford was like, we want to be aggressive about controlling our brand in this new world. And so they've done that as a result of that work. So,
One of the things I love, Martha, about
yeah,
all of
yeah,
your examples and how you're conveying the message of relationship to the customer, right? So by incorporating better data, better clarity in each of these examples, what these brands have been able to do successfully is connect with users in a moment of need.
yeah,
And that moment of need has to do with how the product works or where the organization is or how you define who you are. That development of data through our content and experiences is the ability to connect with users, and I think that's super critical for everyone to unlock.
yeah. And I see us on this journey, right? So, like, I think we're still in this, like, let's make sure we're getting visible, right? Which is, I think, why people are investing in visibility measures. But really, we need to get to is control, right? We need to get to a point where we're taking action. And this is in the data, right? Like, this is how we make sure the brand is understood. And, entity linking is driving amazing results. Maybe when we, as we have also seen some results from Profound for some of our customers. We don't have a case study yet on it where like it is moving the needle on ChatGPT visibility on those, again, prompts that
Yeah.
they're measuring. And then the last piece is what you mentioned, which is like, and then at what point are we going to be Yelp? and we're not going to rely on us being crawled or retrieved, but we're going to start sending our data. And we like to call this like activating your knowledge graph, right? Whether
Right.
that be through MCP or NL Web, all things that we do here at Schema App, by the way. So yeah, if you want to know more about what we do, go check out our website. And then our team also put together this agentic web. Like, how do we get to activate? How do you be proactive about that? How do you learn about that? So feel free to kind of download that. And Jordan, you had something that also to share with our viewers here today.
I'm sorry, I was reading the question in the chat. I
Oh,
apologize for
I was just
that.
saying, what
This
is
is a
what
great
what
question, so I was
what's
going to
the
answer it,
report?
but
And then we're gonna get to
yeah,
questions.
sorry
Tell us
about
about the
that.
Previsible. I
Yeah.
imagine being focused. I love it.
So we love producing research, and myself and my fellow co-founders, Dave and Tyson, we put a lot of energy into this research because we feel like it's the best way for all of us to learn and grow in a time of great change in our industry. So you can find more about our AI SEO study, where we go through this whole discovery report, break down categories, break down what pages are working. And I hope you can use some of those insights to help inform your organizations, help inform your teams, because that's going to help to drive the work you want to do, which relates back to the first question, which is about what is the approach? How do you do SEO, GEO? And is it the same, different from SEO? And I think it's a really valid question because that's kind of the heart of this conversation today.
So what do you think? How is the approach different?
I was going to put you up first, Martha.
Oh, okay. Well, I think like so with some of it's that switch in thinking, right? So like when I presented at the Tech SEO Connect in November, I was like, we need to start thinking like data architects. Like we can't keep thinking just as SEOs, right? We need to be thinking about how we are we organizing and preparing our marketing data, right? Your website to be kind of like interacting with these like different machines. And I say machines because like right now it's a chatbot, right? It's AI. We're thinking about Perplexity and how do we make sure that the content's available. But it's agents are next, right? Our agents are like also happening, and I think part of it is again, I like to think of like we have to take organizations from just thinking about visibility to getting to control, and then I think the other is like when you have that data, we need to be thinking about how do we leverage this asset now within the enterprise or within the organization. And this is a I really I'm excited that this time of AEO and GEO is going to be a silo bashing time within organizations because all of a sudden SEOs are sitting on this amazing data set that again, like if you're doing it
Yeah.
properly, working with Schema App and building knowledge graphs, like go knock on IT's door and be like,
Yeah.
hey, I know I read some like crazy stat recently. It used to be like 75% of AI initiatives within the enterprise are failing because of data readiness. And I think like, SEOs have that data right available. And
That's
so
correct.
that's like a big switch I'm thinking of. And then I think I loved your kind of comment around, you know, where are our consumers discovering and interacting? And then how are we again taking action to make sure our data is available to in those places? And right now we're still thinking of ChatGPT. I think it's going to get much broader than that, especially when we get into verticalized experiences with agents, et cetera. So those are my
Yeah.
thoughts. Jordan, what do you think?
I think that the biggest difference in this AEO versus GEO, and SEO as a traditional sense is the pace at which we need to be moving from just foundational. So doing foundational things like having pricing data and category data and color variation data. That's just table stakes today. That is just the baseline of what an e-commerce site should have in their schema on their pages from an experience perspective. How are we iterating off of that to add value to consumers who are getting to the heart of what they need? And that is really an unlock in terms of your content strategy, your web experience strategy, your authority building strategy. And then to your point, Martha, for some organizations, that means we got to break down silos because we as organic marketers need to work with a broader set of people in an organization. We're no longer just PMs of SEO. We're no longer just content marketers of SEO. We are cross functional in a much deeper way than ever before. And I think that's where it's always been hard to do great SEO is going to be hard to do great AEO, GEO work. And that I think fundamentally is where the approach is in terms of the question is the approach is how do you pull in all of those capabilities to reach your audience?
Okay, I have to tell this awesome story.
Okay.
Um, so I was thinking of the question actually that Michael asked here, which is like, where is agentic web going 12 to 18 months? But I was also thinking about like, how are we thinking like our consumer and knowing if what we've done today is good enough is where my brain was going. And what's really cool about NL Web is this sort of agentic endpoint, but it's also a conversational. It's almost like having a chatbot on your on-site search. So what's really been cool is we've actually built, we call it Knowledge Assistant, but it's like NL Web inside Schema App, where you get to like test what it's like to be your consumer, asking chat questions on your knowledge graph. And what's cool about this is like, in order for us to discover what content gaps we have, even like color variations, we kind of need to act like our consumer, right? And we need to do that in a safe way, right? So most organizations, by the way, it's already out there because everyone's on ChatGPT. But what we've been allowing our customers to do, especially in healthcare and finance, right? Areas that are like highly regulated, is actually like act like their consumer on their knowledge graph to do this discovery of where there's content gaps, of like, what are some of the things that you truly are an authority on, or where is there maybe things that like it's not referencing on your website because you don't go deep enough, right, into that sort of like personalized experience or answer. And so we're finding like this sort of, we call it like our early adoption exercise of Knowledge Assistant or powered by an NL Web, like on our knowledge graphs, are creating this like cool experience for the marketers and SEOs to kind of understand where those gaps are. And so when I think about like where the agentic web is going, it's where that's just like happening by an agent, right? So the actions
Yeah.
are just happening. And there's some cool work we're seeing. Our Viku Hadu, who is the creator of Schema Network and also leading this NL Web project at Microsoft, where they're starting to define actions, right, within the schema vocabulary. And I think this is like around agent readiness, right? This is around,
Yeah.
you know, just all the clicks, CTAs and things we have are soon going to be needing to be done by a robot. And guess what? There's not a human in the middle of that, right? Like we need to make sure the actions lead to the data that then lead to
Yeah.
like, the door to then have that
Right.
conversation. Yeah. So that's like, I'm excited about that because I'm seeing that learning happening.
100%. I mean, this is in the next 12 to 18 months, this is going from, to your point, activity and event based understanding of what consumers are doing. This is getting at the heart of what a human wants to do in an LLM. This is Etsy, Walmart, and a bunch of major commerce players being a part of agentic commerce protocol, which specifically has the conversion event happening within ChatGPT.
Yep.
Nobody visited Etsy. Nobody visited Walmart. You bought it right in ChatGPT. That is the 12 to 18-month journey on this, which means, to back to the beginning of this whole webinar, it means that we're not measuring in the same linear fashion. That funnel is totally different if all the SEO work you did ends up in a conversion event within an LLM response.
Yeah, they never came to your site, right? This is like,
Never.
and so how are we controlling that? That's like maybe like the last piece to not be a broken
Yeah.
record is like, let's not sit by and just measure. Let's take action, right? Let's reduce that business risk by being ready. Jordan, thank you so much for joining
Yes.
us
No,
today.
thank you, Martha. Thank you.
We always have fun conversations. I think, are you going to be at SMX Advanced?
I will be, yes, in Boston.
Amazing.
Yep.
Okay,
I will
I'll
be
be there
there.
too. If you're going to be at SMX
Yep.
Advance, come find us. If you want to follow Schema App on LinkedIn, I will post some pictures from Search Console Live in Toronto that's happening on Tuesday. I might have a fun
Awesome.
Schema T-shirt to wear to show off. But thank you for joining. Thank you for sharing your great knowledge, and thanks everyone for attending. Have a great day.